Most product management coaches come with one org on their CV that shaped everything they think. Tim Herbig went a different way. He moved through publishing, marketplaces products, and enterprise SaaS as an in-house PM, watched what broke at each stage, and then chose to leave so he could work across many orgs at the same time. Today he coaches a broad range of teams, published his book Real Progress, and Tim has a cross-org view and does not speak from one company and one moment. He sees patterns across dozens of situations, and I wanted that perspective in this room. Tim, welcome to Product Org Unmasked.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm very much looking forward to have that conversation with you today. Let's start. You spent years as an in-house PM across different product contexts, and then you chose to go independent. What made you leave?
I think one thing that I noticed early on in my career is that I always had an urge to talk about the craft of product beyond just doing it and trying to force myself to synthesize the learning. And the first time I got a bit of a knack for that was I joined by accident, like for a short period of time, a small consultancy. For that period, the first time I had to rethink, how do I communicate what I know to someone who doesn't know that? So not just talking with peers, but how do I educate people in a way that doesn't feel like lecturing? And I realized that I enjoyed that very much. And so that what led me to then say, why don't I do this more? I enjoy the diversity of challenging myself, of always having to immerse myself into a new client's context, the new challenges. And that was the main driver to the excitement of this diversity of challenges I get to face by working independent.
Okay. So you wanted that exposure to a broader base of companies because you enjoyed talking and because you wanted to get the exposure to even more problems?
Yeah, I think I would maybe even say primarily because of this challenge of getting exposed to the new problems. Because I love this question, like when a team brings up this question, and let's say it's even a more exotic team. Let's just say an internal facing team at an SMB for agriculture hardware. Like, how do we apply this to this context? And I was like, that is actually a really good question. I love this journey of figuring it out with them because I feel everyone who pretends to have all the answers across all contexts is lying, frankly, because no one has that. And I think part of that is acknowledging this messy figuring it out together. And yeah, for some interesting reason, I enjoy that.
Interesting. Yeah, would love to learn why. I think you said an interesting thing. You love figuring it out with your clients. I wonder which percentage of your work is relying on things you can repeat in every single company, and which percentage is really always starting from scratch?
From the top of my head, I might say I think 60% might be building on what has been there because I feel the problems are the same. Pattern, the fundamental constellation a team is facing is the same. And I think if you really break it down, it's always about how do I solve a customer problem that drives business goal with a group of maybe like-minded, but also diverse people. Like that is the situation every product team is in. And I think if you can apply lots of principles and structures to that fundamental bit, and then you have to layer on top of it, okay, how do I do this internal facing? How do I do this B2B, B2C? How do I do it hardware with a software or hybrid, remote, on-site, like all these different layers, like SaaS, whatever. So I would say 60% is this, like, you can always go back to this fundamental question thinking. And then it's like, okay, how does this, like, what tactic works in this context? And which one doesn't and why, and helping then the team understand when to apply which tactic and how to execute it, let's say, at a good enough quality level that it actually helps them get that result.
You said that the journey with the teams is the thing that you think is very interesting, and there is a lot of things already that you can potentially build up upon, which is good. At the same time, I wonder what makes a team really successful, because I assume you always face also teams that do not change anything at all, no matter how hard they want it or how hard they tried. They will still fall back into their old ways of working once you left.
Right.
What is the difference between the teams that continue working in a new way and the teams that just fall back to what they've always done?
I think it's an amazing question. I think for me, like a couple of years ago, I might have listed 10 different frameworks for that. Today, I would say two different things. Today, I would say, A, it is a healthy sense of ambition within the team, and ambition about to just improve, right? To not about like the best or whatever, but just to like the same thing. Like you will face new challenges as a team along the way, and having the ambition to excel in that. I think that's the first one. This ambition. The second part for me is this. I think it's easy to fall into the role of being the victim in an organization that doesn't give you all the capabilities, that doesn't have good strategy, blah 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 blah. All of that exists. I think there's a difference between I work with what I have from the mandate and sphere of influence that I have as a team, compared to I lay on my back and say everything is so shitty I can't do anything. And I think the combination of that is like acknowledging what you have, not getting lost in the victimizing and complaining, while having the ambition to, okay, how can I change my sphere of influence, but also how can I keep pushing forward? And I think, again, that's something pretty universal, you could say. This is true for whether you do an AI product or work with AI or old school manual hardware stuff. Like, I think that is something fundamentally true.
Okay. Is there any story you can share about a team where you potentially even felt like they will never cross the finish line at all because they are so lost, but in the end they surprised you?
I think I think one thing that comes to my mind is once I worked with a company with a pretty like still owner founder led, more like legacy-ish company. And there was the situation where we talked a lot about design details and how to push something forward. Let's say the middle management layer was always blocking design changes and always pushed for something that didn't really make sense if you had this ambition of a better solution. And we're really like, it was very close to getting lost in this victimhood kind of stuff. Like, why don't they like our design solution and blah, blah, blah. They can't see it, etc., etc. Until you realize that there was an incentive in the company to say, it's about producing a certain number of apps this year. So the incentive was not to come to the best possible solution. It was to get a certain number of apps out. And so I was like, interesting. And it was clear that as part of that team, we couldn't change that. Like that was a lost battle. We couldn't change the company's incentive structure. So we focused on how can we, within the constraint of a certain output focus, how can we apply practices within that constraint and then not get lost in the victimhood and the complaining, but like, how can we deliver the best possible solution for customers and the business within that constraint? And it doesn't lead you to the best possible solution as you read in the books, but it helps you to make progress in the context that you are in.
What was your key learning from that experience?
The key learning is for me to choose your battles. Like accept what you can change, what you cannot change, and to focus the energy and the skill that you have on the things that you can change in this very moment, instead of like letting yourself get drained by fighting a battle that's not yours at this point.
Is that something that is a leadership task, or is it a PM task, or do they first need to become the most aligned team ever before they can even tackle that one?
I think if you look, what I'm seeing is, I think in theory, it's pretty, like many things, it's pretty simple. And like one exercise that I routinely recommend teams is to sit down, maybe with the leader, if they have this conflict with like the middle management, and just like write down, independent from each other, what does each party think this team can truly influence, and then compare it. And what's interesting is that the management always thinks the team can influence more than the team thinks, and the team thinks smaller than what they actually can do. And so then you have to have this like mini negotiation of like, hey, you can actually do this. Or maybe the team thinks we are not allowed to do, but then they get the mandate to do so. So I think this simple explicit making, so like what you would try to do in product, to not work on assumptions, you can do the same thing about the work that you do and like what are you allowed to do. And I think therefore it's something that's so within reach of everyone, but I think it's so obvious that most people don't see it.
Yeah, that's true. And you said that making things explicit is what potentially changes how teams work or how they perceive themselves or how they position themselves. The thing that I do see is that most teams and most leaders never find time to make things explicit because they're just firefighting and trying to calm down all the stakeholders and to prepare the perfect strategy. And they never find time to really get things done, right? So you can either do that as a coach. I think it's a smart company that hires a coach to help them zoom out. But if you were a leader, what would be your recommendation for teams in a similar situation?
I think, of course, let's say I will answer under the assumption that that leadership person is self-aware enough to recognize that, right? I think as a precondition, because chances are you might not be for whatever reason, right? I think I had this conversation with another organization recently, and they were trying to make this fundamental shift of leading the product org from opinion based to more evidence based, right? They predominantly thought about solving this through upskilling the teams and training and all this stuff, which is not wrong, right? You need that. And yet what I found, what I try to remind them of, is that when you have any kind of leadership interaction, whether it's a roadmap meeting, whatever you have, that the leadership team plays the same, it's like a 50-50 responsibility. Like the teams, of course, need the skills and capabilities to step into that change. And, there's this great quote from Charlie Munger, show me the incentive, I show you the outcome. And if as a team you're incentivized by the, let's say, approval or praise by leadership team, a leadership team never challenges you on the evidence that you have to make your decisions, you will not do it. So it's this give and take that leadership has to flip the default essentially towards every conversation, saying something simple as, and why do you think this is a good idea? Or what makes you think we should do this? To continuously open with that sentence so teams get really drilled into, I need to have some kind of narrative. I don't need to bring a 200 pages PDF of scientific studies, but I need to have a narrative around the evidence to make that decision. So I think it's this realizing the change you want to see, coming back to your question, and then, but also ingraining that into your behavior as well and changing your default so that the teams get continuously reminded. And I think that's the key responsibility in leadership then. It's not teaching the skills per se. It's this continuously opening the space you want the teams to step into.
I see. And that's why you said in the beginning, 2 years ago, you might have said it's a bunch of frameworks, you throw it into the org and they will run smooth.
Right.
Today, it's different because what I hear is it's rather tiny habits, a bunch of tiny habits. It starts with self-awareness in leaders and also maybe in the PM team itself, but it goes further because you also need to change small things in your day-to-day interactions with the leadership team, with your PMs, and then the entire upskilling part and systems thinking might come on top of it, but it always starts with us as leaders.
Yeah, and it's this chicken and egg problem, because on the one hand, you cannot expect teams to step into more accountability and more impactful work without them giving them the skills and the enablement. And at the same time, the teams will not step into the space if they don't get that room opened up by leadership. And it's one of them has to start, right? And I would like to think that, I think it's not too much to ask of leaders to be the ones to start this. I mean, that's part of the deal one has signed up, I think.
Yeah, true. And nobody said leadership is easy.
Yeah, otherwise everyone would do it.
Would want to do it.
Yeah, but I think as a side note, I find that many people I get to meet try to want to become leadership roles for the quote unquote wrong reasons. They just want to get out of the hamster wheel of the IC. And then it's I'm not sure if that's the best incentive to become a leadership person.
Oh, that's definitely my key learning from my own career. I always felt like if I only get one step higher on the ladder, and if I finally have the seat on the table, I will finally be able to really, really build great products. Unfortunately, that was never the case because there's always someone above you and there's always dynamics and there's always other stakeholders and surroundings that are out of your control.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, we have to accept that. It is always a battle. You just get paid more and you carry more responsibilities.
Exactly.
And you're potentially fired faster if you do things wrong.
Exactly. So it's where's the upside again in that, right? It's
Money.
It's interesting. Exactly. It's an interesting, again, it comes back to self-awareness.
Yeah. Now, the upside is money, status, and you get invited to podcasts and on stage because everyone wants to have your name on there. Yeah, that's the only thing. If that's the reason to go into leadership positions, no kidding. Leadership is amazing. It's a growth curve.
It might just not be for everyone.
It's true, but it's also fine to figure that out during your career and go back to IC role. Try it out.
I think it's one thing people to tell you that, and you're like, it's different for me. Then you step into it, you're like, whatever, right? I want to go back to being IC. I want to get my hands dirty.
Or I want to become a coach or start my portfolio career, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Tim, in our preparation for today, you said orgs right now are confusing freed up capacity from AI with a mandate to ship more unproven things.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like in practice when you walk into a team right now?
I think in practice, it looks like that first of all, the main question, and which might be let's say maybe it's the right question, but the first question is, can we accelerate the building of this feature by leveraging AI, right? Which is a fair question to say. I think it's a great accelerator. The problem that gets lost, of course, is that, and it's interesting because it's an accelerator or an amplifier of a problem that might have been there before. So maybe you took 6 months to ship something. You didn't define success metrics. You didn't look back whether it was successful. You just patted yourself on the back. Now you do the same thing, but you ship in a week. But the problem is the same, that you have stuff out there that you don't know if it made sense to build that. You accumulate tax, you act debt and potential user satisfaction debt. And I think that's the main thing that just gets accelerated, right? I think there's a legitimate point to say, well, we can learn faster. Yeah, great, of course. But learning requires you know what you want to learn and you have the capabilities to measure it, to reflect on the learning. And I think that part hasn't accelerated the same way the building has accelerated. It just gets amplified of what has been there before. People love this shiny object syndrome of just being able to fulfill all the feature backlog ideas of the CEO and their friends much faster without truly figuring out, did this make sense? So I'm all for shipping more if you make sure that you reflect on whether it made sense to ship that and then kill things again, because otherwise you have this graveyard of features in your UI that nobody wants to use.
Yeah, that's true. But I would argue that product leaders would want exactly that, right? I think most product leaders in the world, meanwhile, understand outcome over output, measure the impact. But then there's all the surroundings. And I recently talked about that. Your CEO starts vibe coding, your sales team starts vibe coding, your marketing team starts vibe coding. Everyone feels like, wow, building things is so fast now. Why are the product teams still so slow?
Yeah.
So as a product leader, I think it's a little bit unfair to say like, yeah, maybe just build better things or do more discovery and like really consider what you're building, because the pressure does not go away and the pressure is real. What is your recommendation to still find time to slow things down without losing trust and credibility within your organization?
That's a good one. I think first of all, there has to be some kind of shared understanding in the org of that. Again, this fundamental thing of how do you measure whether something was successful? I think that could be applied to it doesn't matter if someone vibe codes something, that's great. But I would assume for many people, if you dig into what they vibe coded and you ask them, is this successful? Does this meet the expectations that you had? And how would you know? That many are not able to answer that. And I think recognizing that, again, play around with things, ship stuff, cool. But I think at one point you want to remind yourself, well, what do we do with all this stuff out there? So I think this principle-based understanding, I think it's worth having. And the other thing is then, okay, I think it's in the mix of like, what do we prioritize as a company? Do we recognize or incentivize or prioritize output speed at all cost over, let's say, bottom line impact, customer impact? How do we measure that? I feel, is there a buy into that idea? And that doesn't mean that you per se have to slow down vibe coding or output creation. It's just to evaluate these measures a bit differently. And in general, honestly, I think as another part of that, to me, it feels like, and I'm sure you've come across the same, is like whenever there's a change, like people, humanity as a whole, the pendulum likes to swing from one extreme to the other. And at one point you realize, oh, this is too far over there. The pendulum needs to stop somewhere in the middle. And I just feel this whole vibe coding excitement and pressure and speed is part of the pendulum swinging pretty far into one corner. And eventually it's part of a natural correction cycle that every org will find its own more sustainable pace for the pendulum to stop. And I feel this excitement and pressure is part of that figuring it out experience. You can't shortcut it. I think you can't prevent orgs.
No, that's true. You can't prevent. The one thing that I do see is that those leaders who haven't been able to build credibility within their organization and who were not leading, but really rather running behind all the feature requests and wish lists, now are really close to burnout because suddenly they do not have to clean up 500 roadmap items, but 5,000. Everyone is building things themselves and they can't argue why they can do their job better. So obviously there is such a big gap between what they delivered and what now everyone else can deliver, that closing this gap is potentially the most important thing you should do right now. And I would even argue you're very late to the party if you only start now.
Yeah, and I think what comes to my mind as an analogy is that if you are in this habit or pace that you described before, you already were running in a hamster wheel, but now the wheel has basically just started to spin 10 times faster. You cannot leave it if you're in this mode of operandi of always discussing when is this done, when will this be shipped, you're only chasing the requirements. You cannot get out of that, and the pace is just too high to sustain for most people or even organizations.
Yeah, which leads back to something you said earlier, or what we said earlier. It's this build tiny habits, like don't use frameworks. Don't try to
Right.
introduce the next big process or form where you want to collect all of the wish list ideas, but rather change tiny habits so that you build back your credibility. What are the 2 to 3 things that you would recommend a leader in exactly that situation, in that 10 times faster spinning hamster wheel?
I think I would go back to this one thing I mentioned about this one org I work with, like to say, like, which default do you have to change? Like like changing the default from when is it done? Because that is not a real question anymore. When is it done? You can always speed this up, but more like, why should we do this? Like, what's the like, why should we do this? Like the simple question, which sends everyone down in a hurry, and ideally you do this metric based. I think this is the one thing. The other thing is, and again, this, I feel like it goes back to the as you said, the tiny habit idea of like, are you trying to dump an entire AI operating system on the entire org all at once, or where you realize, okay, that's not, maybe not how it works, but like which parts, and you could, again, it's like problem solving, which we should be good at as product people, like which part of our work has the biggest lag, or which takes up the most manual time, and why don't we start there instead of trying to fix everything at once? So this deliberate swapping of ways of working, for example, I think this could be the other one. And I think the third one might also be to acknowledge that no one really knows how this will play out. Like no one really knows, like not trying to create false certainty through overly confident predictions, but to acknowledge that certainty instead of trying to be the hero who knows it.
Yeah, very nice. Thanks for sharing. You shared another story with me up front, the story about discovery. So you told me about a discovery run where the insights lived mostly in your head.
Mm-hmm.
And then your boss asked your team to explain what they were doing and they could not. Can you walk me through that?
Yeah, painfully so. So yeah, we did this massive discovery effort with the team, and it was a super exciting discovery. And of course, you can argue we got a bit lost in the discovery spiral of methods and things to learn, stuff like that. But in the end, we landed on a spot that was pretty clear. And I loved that clarity. Is like I was excited about what we were doing, but I did never. And I also took a new team to work on that. And then I was like lost in stories, keeping the team productive, figuring out stakeholder stuff. But the team was like heads down doing that. But they were always like hard to buy in. And then there was this painful moment where I wasn't there. And then my boss sat me down and was like, look, you might be onto something, but you have to figure this out. Like how is it possible that this team of expensive engineers has no idea why they're doing that? Right? I was like, you're right. And for me, it was like, how is not clear? I'm talking about this all the time, but apparently I didn't talk about it in a way that landed with people, right? And then it was interesting. The fix was so simple, because then it was like we sat down half a day. I grabbed like a random product strategy template and just filled in the stuff I knew into a concise format. And then people could get on board.
Okay.
So the problem was not the lack of knowledge. The problem was just how it was communicated in a way and how it was transmitted. And so that's even more frustrating, of course, if the fix is so simple. But just because of the stories in your head, you can't see the obvious.
Interesting. But you said you shared and you talked a lot about it. So you felt like you're already communicating. Was it really just the one template then that you filled out together, or was there more to it?
The funny thing is, it wasn't even filling it out together, because we did this discovery for months, and I finally just like synthesized the intent into a template. And suddenly there was something specific, concrete for the team to look at while they were doing that, compared to a bunch of messy user stories and sprints and wild UI designs the designers has come up with. And of course, then the other thing was to take the time together to really just feeling like I'm repeating myself of like, okay, half a day, this team, this other team, and I'm just going to walk you through what we learned over the last couple of months and why we're doing this. So just basically repeating it. Yeah. But it was nothing was new. It was all just bringing what was there into the right format so it could truly reach people.
Okay, that reminds me a little bit of my story whenever I create strategy. I start creating a strategy, the slides look good, I present them, I feel like everyone got it, I share it, and then many things happen. People don't read the documents. They listen to what I'm saying, but they leave the room with a completely different story than the one I thought I shared. And as soon as they left the room, the strategy changed again because I got new insights or someone inspired me to enrich it. So the document I presented is already outdated once the people leave the room. And I feel like that is the hardest part of leadership work, to constantly keep people in the loop, because it requires me to be so clear in what I'm sharing, but it also requires them to read and listen to me and to leave the room with the same story. And they need to keep, or I need to keep them in the loop so that everyone is always aligned at least 80%. I have never achieved that state of perfectionism in any of my roles.
Can relate. It's this. I once heard this great quote on a podcast from someone who said, when you start to getting sick of the message, that's when it starts to sink in with others. I was like, yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit before we started. I think it's this mix, for me, it's this mix of impatience and clarity and like frustration about speed. Like something in there makes it harder to truly empathize with how a message might land and to accept the slower pace that might be needed for things to really land. Because from the story, like when it doesn't land, it doesn't matter how great it is, how great it is in my head, how great the evidence is, how great the discovery is. None of that matters.
What changed for you, your team, and your boss once you fixed that?
The main change for me was to repeat myself much more often. For the team, of course, not everything was for the better, because of course then they also had questions about the strategic direction, right? It wasn't that they just said, yeah, great idea, good stuff. It was like, yeah, I get it, but. So it wasn't, maybe created new areas of friction, new areas of friction. I think for my boss, the good thing that has changed was that he saw that I was able to accept feedback. Right? I wasn't like on the high horse of like, what are you talking about? That's not right. I'm just going to keep doing my thing. I was like, yeah, I can accept the mistake I made. I can hear the feedback. I can find a solution to address that and act on that. I think that was what he saw, that I was receptive. I can be receptive to feedback. Maybe was his takeaway. But I should ask him.
Maybe you should. But did it improve the quality of the product or the success?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure it did. But because I think that the direction and trajectory the product itself was on, I like to think was relatively good, because it came from strong evidence and strong decision making before. I think it was not so much that the what of the solution per se has changed. I think it was more about the how we got there as a team, as a journey, as a process. I think that was probably the more positive impact, because it didn't highlight gaps of evidence, gaps of understanding. That was relatively solid, and people had signed off on that as well. So I think it was more on the team journey part where the influence was more positive.
Okay, interesting. Because that's what I feel as well. This entire communicating and keep everyone in the loop as a leader is super exhausting. And you will always have people who question the things you're going to do. And no one will ever be 100% aligned with what you're doing. Plus things change. Still, you try to always communicate and keep everyone in the loop. But my question often is, does it really change the quality of the product?
Right.
Or is it just our personal feeling of, oh, people complain the whole day that there is no strategy and they don't get the strategy and they want me, although it's there. And I'm not doing this to build better products, but I'm doing it so that at some point in time, people get quiet and just do the work, but they never will.
I 100% agree, because I think there's also the sentiment that some people are so gifted with product sense and decision making that they have this solo genius kind of thing. You know, they can build amazing stuff, but they have to swap the team every 3 months because they burn everyone out. So I think there's definitely an influence there on what the actual benefit is, and it might not be just on the product quality.
Yeah. So it's maybe more a team motivation thing, because if people feel involved and part of the journey, they might be more energized and motivated to also build cool stuff.
And I think it's more sustainable as well, right? It's like, because then you don't burn people out as much. I think in the long term, I think you probably see the benefit of the product quality more in the long term, because then people have context, people have buy-in to the idea, people are more thoughtful about the changes that they make, compared to you just dictating the genius idea you think you have, and everyone just has to shut up and listen.
No one wants to be the hippo, but we all are to some extent, right?
Yeah.
No one tells you. We always complained about the leaders who have the ideas and are not communicating clearly, until we are those leaders ourselves and we have no idea on how to escape that trap.
Yeah. I also would say, like, just on that note, I think like I have yet to meet a company where the sentiment was not, the strategy is not clear enough. I would get €1 for every time I get this question. It's like, yeah, heard that before. But this goes back to this topic we had before. Like, do you get lost in the victimhood of that? Or can you see, okay, what is in there in this imperfect strategy that I can use for decision making or to demand clarity?
I think it's a total lie that there is any company with a perfect strategy.
Yeah,
It's just not existing. And we should really stop trying to achieve that ideal
exactly.
state.
Yeah, agreed.
Let's take a broader lens. You said in the pre-questionnaire, cutting through the AI LinkedIn bubble is one of the hardest things your clients face right now.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think our product community is getting wrong about AI right now?
One thing that I feel could be a lie is that the unlock of AI productivity gains lies in the next model or the next tool. I sometimes feel that the hype about technology releases, not to all, but for some of the technology releases, like you have to understand this fully, when like maybe you don't have to understand it fully, because you can maybe unlock 80% of gains with what you have or whatever it is. So I feel that could be something that the FOMO that gets created about new technological possibilities might not always be in proportion of the actual gains, especially for established product orgs, because most of the content I see, I don't know how it is for you, most content I see comes from solo builders, solopreneurs, building AI native companies from scratch, running 20 portfolio companies all at once. But like, if you're a PM, 5,000 people product org, building a 50, 30-year product, that does not equally apply. And so you trying then to chase that object, trying to get the same setup when that might miss the mark of unlocking productivity in your context. That feels, I think, yeah, the FOMO we create, I feel like the FOMO we create among each other of what one has to learn next sometimes feels a bit out of proportion.
And especially for larger orgs, I also feel like we're focusing too much on building faster, which creates shit, as we know. And most people I talk to tell me they use AI to prompt and to write better PRDs, and that's all nice. But I feel like the number one problem that I would solve as a leader is to finally create the one single source of truth for all the material we talked about earlier, right? Like if there are 10 different versions of the strategy, who should know which one is valid right now? And everyone is presenting different slides to different people. Obviously, everyone is confused. AI can fix that. If I didn't start recording my meetings now and use the transcript to feed into my
Right.
product operating model, well, I'm lost, right? Because I'm losing context. And I think there are so many small things we can do with AI, even in an enterprise or larger org setup, that people just don't do because they haven't established these habits of
Agreed.
creating context and of feeding the context with what they are collecting every single day. And to me, it's not just about build, because in the end, you also have your CTO saying like, no, we're not going to use
Yeah,
whatever Cloud
exactly.
thing. And then you're blocked anyways. And still you can do things and you can still create more clarity, but you need to get started. And that's where most people fail, because they feel like prompting into ChatGPT, they are using AI. And that's, sorry guys, but that is like 2024.
I feel like oftentimes I use an analogy when I talk about team composition is, what is the unfair advantage of a role? Like, what is something only you can do as a person? And again, this is not tied to the title. This is tied to the skills of the person. And I feel AI allows you to do two things. AI allows you to expand from your core advantage a little bit more, right? You, as a PM, you can be a bit more technical, a bit more designy. Like, you can expand a bit into that. You can blow that up. But I think the most interesting part is, how can you use AI to strengthen and accelerate and leverage this unfair advantage more? So like you said, I think one of the unfair advantages of product managers is to set direction, to put it simply, through all the combination of the different fun stuff. And how can you use your personal repository, your tooling, to get better at setting and communicating direction? Because that will always be a demand from you. And so how can you work with that? I think that, again, that's then what you said. It's not just prompting. It's how do you build, again, of course, then you have this other challenge, sharing context in collaboration with others, but also versus your own work. And I think one way or the other, we have to figure out both. But I feel this unfair advantage acceleration is something that I recommend people to look at.
Yeah, agree. Now, your key focus areas are discovery, OKRs, strategy. What is the one thing you would recommend leaders to do with AI to improve in these areas?
So I think it's all different levels. I think as you go from strategy to goals to discovery, the actual usage of AI gets more tactical as you get to discovery. I think on a strategy level, the question I think is mostly, where does AI sit in our strategy? Like, what do we want to do? Because AI by itself is not a differentiator. It's not a value prop by itself. So how does it feed into the strategic things we want to do anyways? I think that's on that level the biggest question. Of course, you have the funny stuff. You can do easier research, competitor observation, blah, blah, all the easy stuff. That can happen on strategy. But since strategy is about these hard conversations, it's still more human. You can just maybe replace some of the tasks. I think for goal setting, then it gets a little bit more tactical because people should be able to tap into strategic context more easily, more automated. Maybe not accelerating the drafting, but also getting sanity checks on, does this goal make sense, to get sparring on which goals contradict each other from other teams, like to resolve this lateral tension a bit easier. So we have a bit more tactical. You still want to do the drafting, the crafting itself, but you can set it up more nicely. I think for discovery, of course, right now, I would say that's where next to delivery, you can get the biggest tactical benefits in terms of obviously prototyping, obviously preparing things like interview questionnaires, obviously things like maybe even as a PM being able to deploy fake door tests to production more easily if you have a good setup for that. In terms of like synthesizing insights, you have to be very careful of like what kind of results you're trusting, how much hallucination is going on, what kind of input output. So again, leveraging the tool for the acceleration. But I think definitely on the discovery level, you have the biggest tactical change so far from AI.
How much of what you described do you see in reality right now?
I think the most what I see is there's this obsession with shipping faster. I think it has systemically across the board, I would say people are still trying to figure out how to integrate AI on these more upstream activities. I think the most common one that I see is people experimenting with building knowledge repositories, what you said, like how can I synthesize across qualitative and quantitative insights that I'm gathering. I think there's some more funky stuff, like do you let AI do the interview itself? I mean, play around with that. Who knows how good it is? Only time will tell. Beyond that, I haven't seen that. The anti-pattern would be people asking ChatGPT to draft their OKRs, which I'm not necessarily recommending, but people want to learn.
So big difference between what we read on social and what we experience in reality.
Yeah, at least for, let's say, the clients that I have as in more mature, established SMBs and enterprises. I think that's a different story than what the LinkedIn bros might want to make you believe.
Cool. I have one last question for the closing round. Tell me about something that you believed 5 years ago that you've completely reversed on.
If there's one thing, I would say it is that I need teams to understand how to apply a method correctly. They don't. It's fine if they only get it partially, as long as it helps them to basically course correct a little bit. How messy or incorrect the actual application is doesn't matter.
How do you measure success in that case?
For me, it's measuring success would be that it would be that they don't come back too often with questions on, have I done this correctly? And the second one is that they stop the anti-pattern. So something as simple as, let's say something as assumptions mapping, right? I think powerful, simple, vastly undervalued. And so A, that they don't think, is this assumption map correct? And B, the positive outcome would be that they know when they use them, like that they can truly link the method to the assumption and pick the method because of the assumption, not because of a default they have been running.
Excellent. So they should make it theirs and not just follow a rigid structure.
Pretty much, yeah.
Cool. Thank you. We're at the end. Thanks for your time. That was super
Awesome.
interesting conversation.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Same.